Hey everyone! Welcome back to UHYEAH Season OG, FNAF Month 2. Wow. It sure has been one crazy June, which is definitely still the current month, full of twists and turns. Dude. Oh, Blue UHYEAH. What a surprise. Dude. It's almost September. What? Are you seriously surprised about this? Check a calendar every now and then, man. Damn. Well, shit. I guess FNAF Month 2 is over. I mean, you might as well just finish this video first if you were already gonna do it, but what do I know? No, you're right. Screw what month it is. Let's finish this event with a bang. I think it's a little late for a bang, champ. I think we're aiming for something more like a thud at this point. Okay, you've overstayed your welcome. Get out! Alright, so clearly this whole FNAF Month thing is cursed. Sorry about that. To make it up to you, screw FNAF Month, I'll just make FNAF videos whenever I feel like I have a fun video topic. That's probably a healthier way to go about doing this anyway. Actually, this perfectly transitions into today's video, because I was having trouble figuring out what I even wanted to do for it, if that wasn't painfully obvious already. I ended up settling on two different fan games I wanted to potentially make videos on. There's the one I actually chose for this video, which we'll get into later, but the other fan game is like this really obscure FNAF fan game I found while scrolling on GameJolt at like 4 a.m. I don't even know if it's good. I haven't even played it yet. And I don't want to give it away because I'm trying to gatekeep until I make my video. I'm sure you understand. But hey, there's another FNAF video I will probably make soon that has nothing to do with FNAF Month. We should be in good standings moving forward. Enough yapping about that though. How about we start yapping about today's video topic? Banshee. Released on July 23rd, 2025, and created by Kimar Zuru, Banshee is a full-on remake of the final mainline classic-era FNAF game, Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator. Now, that might sound kinda familiar if you've been watching the channel since 2022, because I actually covered another fan game with a pretty similar premise back then called FNAF 6 Freak Show. As you may know from that old video, Freak Show ended up getting cancelled and never came out outside of a demo. I was always pretty bummed about that, because Pizza Sim is like the perfect game for new interpretations and remakes. I feel like opinions on that game are kind of all over the place at this point, but I've always been of the opinion that the salvage and tycoon sections are great, while the office gameplay really leaves a lot to be desired.
Hey guys, it's Mike. This is my re-upload of my top 10 Springtrap facts video.
I appreciate the new gameplay loop Scott tried here, but not even seeing any of these cool ass characters in the vents or on hypothetical cameras or anything outside of the salvage sections and jump scares has always been extremely lame to me. That is exactly why new interpretations of Pizza Sim are so genius. Not only can they potentially fix issues that some may have with the original game, satisfying the naysayers, but they can also get fans of the original game excited for them as well. I mean, for them, it's quite literally the embodiment of that 2 cakes meme, or potentially unlimited cakes if people make more of these. Now, you may have noticed that I keep using the word interpretations here when referring to these different remakes, and that is a very intentional choice. Even though both Freak Show and Banshee are, on the surface, remakes of Pizza Sim, they are actually very different games when it comes to gameplay, tone, style, and pretty much everything else actually. While Freak Show was aiming to be a look into an alternate universe where FNAF 6 was more like the prior entries in terms of style and tone, Banshee takes things in a completely different direction. Not only is it a lot moodier, darker, and intentionally scary looking, it also totally reimagines what the gameplay of Pizza Sim is. Gone are the cramped events, now replaced with a full-on office, closable doors, and entirely new gameplay mechanics, while still keeping the essence of the original gameplay loop alive in some clever ways. Tie that all up with a fully remade Tycoon section, an early PC game aesthetic, and some other cool content, and you have yourself a game that is actually quite far removed from Pizza Sim. With all that said, how about we get into Banshee proper? We're gonna go over all the office gameplay, the Tycoon, the salvage sections, the secrets, and probably a lot more. Strap in, folks. This is gonna be a good one. This is Banshee. Also, make sure to subscribe so I can pass Mr. Breast and subscribers. But first, this video is sponsored by Raycon. Welp, another summer is come and gone, and you know what that means, a bunch of people are going back to school. While I might not be in school anymore since my job is talking about animatronic mechanics and other random slop, I'm sure a lot of you watching are just settling into your new classes, whether it be high school, college, or whatever. However, this fall, we're calling it back to cool, because Raycon's Everyday Earbuds Classic is a must-have for getting back into a routine and making everything feel a little smoother, and a lot cooler. Raycon's Everyday Earbuds Classic is packed with upgrades. They've got active noise cancellation, multi-point connectivity so you can pair with 2 devices at once, and a super comfortable ergonomic design that stays put no matter what you're doing. The new colors are awesome. Personally, I'm into blush violet. I hadn't seen earbuds in that shade before, and they feel like an accessory that actually fits me. Personally, I love to use my earbuds while researching and working on videos, but they're also great for using around the house or really anywhere that fits into your busy schedule. With 32 hours of battery life, a quick charge feature that gives you 90 minutes of playtime in just 10 minutes of charging, and at half the price of other leading audio brands, you really have nothing to lose trying out Raycon. Click the link in the description box or go to buyraycon.com/UHYEAH to get 20% off site-wide. That's buyraycon.com/UHYEAH. Thank you to Raycon for sponsoring this video. Okay. Where do I even begin here? How about we start with the intro? That seems pretty logical. Banshee's opening is by far one of the most unique openings I have ever seen in any FNAF game, official or not. Immediately when you open up the game, before you even see the main menu, you're greeted with a view of the ocean and a pitch black sky. Something you will notice very quickly about this game is that it loves to use the imagery of the empty ocean. Not any kind of ocean close to an island or a beach or something, nope. Simply just the vast emptiness that most of the ocean is composed of. This creative decision is actually a very fascinating one, and I think its meaning to the greater story of Banshee is definitely up to interpretation, at least to a certain extent. As we all already know from Pizza Sim, that story, and by extension this story, deals with both Michael Afton and Henry Emily letting go of their past once and for all by facing it head on one final time, with the fire at the end of the game being the ultimate conclusion of that. I find it interesting that because Pizza Sim is so closely linked with that fire to most people, the decision to focus on this ocean and water imagery is immediately kind of a cool subversion of what people may be expecting going into Banshee. As for what I personally think the ocean imagery means for the narrative of Banshee, I think it's mainly a way to link Henry and Michael together and their similar trauma and history. Both have made mistakes that have haunted them for their whole lives, almost like they might be drowning in the shame and guilt of it all. The vast emptiness of the ocean also perfectly links both of them to pretty much losing everyone they cared about and loved, and the loneliness that comes with that. I truly can't think of a lonelier place than the middle of the ocean, days and days away from land with nobody by your side. The almost endless scope of the ocean also may be used to symbolize the almost inescapable situations both of them are in, which in Pizza Sim was only ended by that infamous fire. So yeah, right off the bat, we have some very strong theming and imagery to look out for in Banshee. The only way to progress further in this opening is to close your eyes in-game using the right mouse button. Doing this and letting go of the button will reveal a single light source in the vast darkness, a full moon. Doing this one final time will trigger the game to start putting text on the screen. Banshee. Noun. A female spirit in Gaelic folklore believed to presage by wailing. A death in the family. The ocean. Shifting mountains with no end. Howling wind and crashing waves. The barrier between life and death. Not only does this opening text help contextualize the ocean imagery in this game, it also pretty blatantly explains to the player why this game is called Banshee. As the game explains, a Banshee is a spirit that warns of a death in the family via wailing. And, I don't know if you know this, but FNAF, Pizza Sim especially, is all about deaths in the family. 4/5 of the cast of animatronics in this game is quite literally composed of dead family members, specifically of Henry and Michael. So yeah, I'd say that title is pretty much perfect. Anyway, great intro. I knew I was getting into something very different from the fan games I've played before right off the bat, but I'm here for it. After the opening concludes, it throws you right into the main menu, which is simply just another view of the ocean, although this time it is much brighter outside. Right off the bat, you can look at the Tycoon, but I didn't end up doing that until a little bit later, so we'll leave it for now. I normally don't talk about settings in these games because, like, who cares? But I have to give major props to the dev for including an option to tone down the static across the entire game, specifically for YouTube uploads. I don't know if you've ever noticed, but static is one of the things YouTube struggles with the most when it comes to maintaining video quality. So this option is much appreciated. The quiet jump scares toggle is also a great addition. The game is scary enough, and sometimes you just don't want your ears blown out, you know? I know this is crazy for me to be saying, considering I love FNAF 4, and well, that game is quite literally just ear blowout simulator, but even I need a break sometimes. Anyway, let's start the actual game. Upon entering a new game for the first time, you're immediately greeted to a long crawl of text going over most of the story leading up to the events of Pizza Sim. The story is slightly changed in this version, such as Michael apparently not being a walking corpse anymore, but overall it's pretty much the exact same story beats from the original canon. Also, I gotta mention that, once again, we have imagery of the ocean accompanying this text crawl. Anyway, not gonna spend any more time on this since I assume most of you already know the classic era FNAF story at this point. If you don't, I don't know, watch some Rye Toast or something. What are you doing here? Anyway, after the text finishes scrolling, we're thrown right into the first salvage section. I'm actually going to cover all the salvage sections together here, since they really do not differ that much from night to night. It's pretty much the exact same thing every time, just like the original game. While the setup here is a little bit different compared to Pizza Sims, the general idea is pretty much the same. You have an animatronic sitting directly in front of you, and you must complete a series of reports before successfully salvaging the animatronic for extra money to use in the Tycoon. The actual gameplay is where things are different, however, as this salvage section does not have you lifting up a piece of paper while looking out for slight movements in the animatronics. Instead, it takes the part of the original salvage sections where you have to listen to garbage jumbled up audio and turns that into the gameplay. So here's how it works. In front of the player is a cassette player that can start and stop a series of 3 different audio recordings that you need to play for the animatronic. While the audio is playing, you need to pull up the EMF reader given to you that will track EMF levels as the audio plays. The goal is to have the EMF reader read the highest amount possible before turning off the audio and logging the result on the computer, which is done by simply clicking on the spacebar. Not the actual physical spacebar in front of you, but the tiny virtual spacebar in-game. Successfully do this 3 times while having the highest level EMF readings to make the maximum amount of money from the salvage sections. The lower the EMF readings logged, the less money you make for the Tycoon. However, it's not that easy. There are a couple things you need to watch out for in order to not get jump scared by the giant terrifying animatronic located directly in front of you. For starters, even though your goal is to have the EMF readings be at their absolute highest when you log them, if you keep the garbage audio playing for too long while the EMF reader is at the highest level, you risk getting jump scared and losing it all. So, you need to be quick with it in order to log the highest recordings and make the most amount of money. The amount of pressure you feel when you're getting close to the highest level and you know you have to act fast soon is really great. And the threat of one of these genuinely terrifying ass designs leaping out at you does not help either. The other hiccup here has to do with the cassette player. While the audio is playing, there's always a chance it may start glitching and skipping itself. If this happens, you have to quickly pause the audio for a moment before turning it back on. This is where the real challenge comes in, since the chance of this happening just increases the further you get into the game, and you really have to be fast in order to avoid getting jump scared. If you do get jump scared in any of these sections, you don't just continue to the actual night like in Pizza Sim. You actually get a game over screen and have to restart the section. I really don't know how to feel about this, because you only get one shot at this structure of the original salvage sections definitely added a lot to them that is definitely missing here. The worst you can screw up on these is simply just logging a bunch of super low readings and making very little money. With that said though, there is substantial content in this game locked behind making a certain amount of money for the Tycoon. So from that perspective, I absolutely do get giving the player an easy way to restart if one of their logs has a bad reading or something. Do I miss it? Sure, but I totally get the change. And that's pretty much it for the salvage sections. It's hard for me to say these are better or worse than the ones in Pizza Sim. They're probably on the same level being real. Although I will say, I think the Pizza Sim ones are definitely harder, even ignoring the whole being able to retry them thing. Regardless, these are still great and serve as a brilliant way to individually introduce each of the new animatronics being added to the gameplay loop in the office sections. Speaking of the animatronics, Jesus fuck, we need to talk about these renders used in the salvage sections. We'll talk about the actual designs as we get to them, but I just could not move on from this section without going over just how scary these look. All the more traditionally scary looking designs look great, as you might expect, but I think the standout here is actually Lefty. I don't think FNAF, specifically classic FNAF, ever really does a good job of selling you just how fucking big some of these animatronics actually are. Not that it's a huge deal or anything, but it's easy to forget just how tall animatronics are sometimes. But here we have Banshee Lefty being so tall, you can't even see her eyes. Not only is that kind of intimidating as hell in a very subtle way, but the fact that, unlike the other three animatronics, you really can't get a good read on what they're thinking is kinda brilliant. Like Afton. You see him in his crazed out look in the salvage section, and you're like, yep, this guy absolutely knows who I am and wants to murder me. But you really don't get that with Lefty. Just a small detail I thought was cool. Anyway, that's the salvage sections. Overall, pretty good. I don't have many complaints. With that out of the way, I think it's finally time we get into the first night. Right off the bat, I just want to say that this is probably one of the most overwhelming first nights in any FNAF game ever. Not that there's actually a lot going on here, it's really just two pretty simple to follow mechanics when you boil it down, but going into this blind, you really have no idea how any of these mechanics work, and it feels like there's so much you can do on the computer in front of you. I don't know, man, it's just a lot. Not that this is necessarily a bad thing, however. I actually enjoyed figuring everything out, and come the later nights, you really feel like a master at the gameplay loop, which is really cool. It definitely feels very complex at the start, but when you boil it all down, the gameplay loop is actually very flexible, very manageable, and has a great learning curve to it. Enough preamble though, let's get into this first night proper. At the start of each night that adds a new animatronic, there's a loading screen with a short blurb of text, vaguely hinting at what their mechanic is. And for this night, that animatronic would be Afton. The hint given for Afton is, make sure to keep a very close eye on Afton, which might be the worst hint in the entire game, I can't lie. But it's not super hard to figure out what his mechanic is through natural gameplay, so I don't really mind. We'll get back to Afton a bit later though. We have a lot of stuff to go over here first, so strap in. Again. Alright, let's start with the very basics here. Even though this office is a completely different setup compared to the cramped vents of Pizza Sim, the layout is actually pretty much the exact same, which is a very clever way to tie the two games together. Just like the vent setup in Pizza Sim, there's a computer that you can use directly in front of you, and two different sides of the room you can look at. The two sides of the room you can look at feature massive doors that you can do nothing but look into. There are sliding doors connected to them, but they're currently out of order, and won't be working again until later in the game. So yeah, this office is pretty much just the Pizza Sim one with a new coat of paint, which is kind of the perfect way to go about something like this. It keeps the general movement feeling familiar, while also being different enough that you can very easily forget that and get lost in the new environment. Even little details like the scattered children's drawings around the office are ripped straight out of the vents in Pizza Sim. It's great. After getting acquainted with the office layout, Henry, as the phone guy, tells you all about the computer system, which is where things begin to get a little overwhelming. The basic idea of this computer system is that it doesn't have any actual UI. Instead, you have to traverse it using a command terminal, which is actually a pretty novel idea. You're immediately told to type help in the terminal, which pulls up a list of commands you can type in order to access the different parts of the computer. Typing exit sends you back to the starting screen, but this is kind of entirely useless. I don't think I used this command a single time while playing the game, I'm not gonna lie. Typing CC pulls up the camera system, which, as you all probably know, is a completely new feature in this game that was not present in Pizza Sim. Banshee opts for more traditional FNAF mechanics for its gameplay, rather than the weird audio lure Hall of Nightmares from Pizza Sim. So in place of the map is a fully functional camera system with some amazing camera renders. We'll talk about those a bit more later though. For now, let's talk about what using the camera system is actually like. Since we're working with a pretty primitive computer here, you can't just click around the camera system like you normally would be able to. Instead, you have to go through the cameras in a linear order. You aren't just stuck in one direction though. You can move forward and back on the list of cameras to your heart's content. Next to the list of cameras is a rough layout of where the cameras are actually located in the building. Without the ability to actually click on the rooms individually, I was worried that the existence of the map would kind of get a little disorienting if knowing exact animatronic positions was a big part of the gameplay, but thankfully it really isn't, and the only animatronics you actually have to track on on the camera have some pretty massive gimmicks to go alongside them, so I think it all works out. Afton, the animatronic added on this night, is insanely easy to deal with without the cameras at all, but obviously you wouldn't know that going into Banshee blind. The hint, make sure to keep a very close eye on Afton, becomes super confusing because of this, because my immediate reaction to seeing it and hearing Henry talk about the camera system in depth on night 1 was, oh, you probably have to carefully track Afton on the cameras or something, when that really isn't the case at all. The cameras don't actually become mandatory until night 2, so maybe it would have been worth properly introducing them then? It just gets really overwhelming on this first night, as I already stated. And this mixed with the 4 different tasks introduced also on this night, you really feel like you're drowning in work. Get it? Drown like the ocean. I'm smart, I'm clever. At the same time though, I do understand to an extent why you would want the players to be familiar with the cameras on night 1, since it makes the introduction of the camera mechanic a lot more natural and less daunting. I don't know man, balancing games is hard. I really can't fault the dev for this. At the end of the day, the way it's currently set up works fine enough. I really do think it's that damn hint muddying this all up. Anyway, that's it for the cameras for now, but we'll talk a little bit more about them later. How about we go over those tasks I just mentioned? The final command you can type into the terminal, for now, is tasks, which brings up a list of 4 different tasks you can do during the night. Each of these tasks can be accessed using their own commands, which can be typed in on any screen, not just this one. Let's rewind a bit here before we talk about these though. As you all know from Pizza Sim, the tasks in that game are mandatory in order to beat the nights. Once you finish the final task, the night ends and you get to progress in the game. These tasks really aren't anything special. All you do is click on them and wait for them to finish before being done. But there really isn't any actual player interaction with them outside of that. Cut to Freak Show, and that game's attempt to improve the tasks was to turn them into little mini-games instead, which I praise as a clever evolution of the same idea that turned the task system into a much more engaging part of the gameplay loop. Banshee also does this, but the way it does it is very different from Freak Show. Freak Show's task minigames were very video gamey. I think that totally worked for what that game was going for, but Banshee is obviously a very different game, especially in terms of style and tone. Because of this, the tasks in Banshee are less like mini games and more like actual busy work you might have to do on a computer while working a job. I bring up the comparison here because I think it's fascinating how 2 different people with 2 completely different visions took the same idea and took them in such wildly different directions. It's just really cool to see. Before we talk about what each of these tasks actually are, there's one more thing I need to bring up regarding the task system in Banshee. Unlike Pizza Sim, the tasks in this game are actually 100% optional. That's right. If you want to completely ignore the tasks and play the game like a normal FNAF game, that is totally a valid option, and the game is actually built for that type of play to still be fun and engaging. Banshee has a normal FNAF clock system, and once that reaches 6 AM, the night will end like normal. So you're probably wondering then, what are the benefits for actually doing the tasks? Well, there's actually a few. For starters, you make money for each task completed. So if you're going for the best ending, you'll probably want to make sure to farm as much money as possible for the Tycoon. But okay, let's say you do not give a single shit about the Tycoon or the good ending or any of that. What is your incentive to complete all the tasks during each night? Well, even though there is a clock in this game, if you still finish all your tasks before the clock reaches 6 AM, the night will end early. This creates an interesting balance where if you're not playing for Tycoon money, you have to weigh if it's worth taking your attention away from the animatronics to try and do the tasks, or if just waiting at the clock while giving 100% of your attention to the animatronics is more beneficial. For a skilled player, doing the tasks will probably always be the faster option, but just the fact the choice is there is great, and gives the player a ton of flexibility in how they want to play the game. I love it. I don't think every FNAF game needs something like this, but when it fits, it fits. Okay, with that out of the way, how about we talk about all 4 of the tasks? The tasks themselves aren't really explained at all, outside of some very brief text, but most of them are simple enough to figure out, so it's mostly fine. There is one that's a little more confusing than the others, but we'll get to that when we get to that. Banshee separates its tasks into 2 categories. Category 1A, which is comprised of Task 1 and Task 2, requires the player to read a series of documents and sort them into one of 2 different groups. The tasks in this category definitely require a little more brain power than the other ones, but they can be done very quickly if you're good at recognizing patterns or are very good at quickly reading things. Category 1B, which is comprised of Task 3 and Task 4, are much simpler tasks that incorporate a lot more waiting and inputting certain commands into the computer. These ones are very easy and can be completed with little effort. So how about we start with them? Task 3 has you waiting for 2 sets of ever-changing numbers to match up. Once they match up, you just have to type that number into the terminal, repeat a few times, and you're done. Very simple, can be done in like a minute or so. Same thing applies to Task 4, which is simply waiting for a series of arrow key inputs to stop shuffling and inputting the correct combination a few times for each of the animatronics as part of a stability procedure. The bit-crushed renders of the animatronics used for these 2 tasks look so fucking creepy, but they fit so well in the context of what the tasks actually are. So yeah, these 2 tasks are not super interesting or anything, and they're really just there to balance out the more time-consuming ones, featured in the first category. But I think they work well enough and fit their role in the gameplay nicely. Speaking of the first category tasks, let's talk about those now. Task 1 has you going through a series of 8 different shipping documents and comparing them to make sure the information is 100% correct. Sometimes these are really easy to spot, like the date being wrong, but other times, it's little things that are easy to miss, such as the last name of a signature being slightly different, or the name of a shipping company not matching up exactly. I swear, there have been multiple times where I was certain I went over everything and it matched up, only for something to slip by me and screw me up. I think this is without a doubt my favorite of the tasks, and I think it is by far the one that requires the most attention. Trying to pick out these little details, while also dealing with the entire gameplay loop on the later nights, is just a different level of hectic. And I love it. If the shipping documents match up, you simply type Y into the terminal to confirm it, and if there's something wrong, you just type N instead. If you submit an incorrect answer for a document, you lose some of your progress and have to do more documents in order to actually reach the 8 document goal. So it's really important to be careful and make sure you're submitting the proper answers to not waste too much time during the night. Shit like this is where it can start to become an actual challenge to complete all 4 tasks before the end of the night. So yeah, definitely better to be slow and steady rather than trying to rush through things. Finally, we have Task 2, which is by far the most confusing task out of the bunch. As far as I can tell, the game doesn't tell you anywhere what you're actually supposed to be doing for this task, so you're just kind of on your own to figure it out. As far as I can tell also, the wiki doesn't have any sort of documentation for each of the tasks individually, so I'm not even sure if what I'm about to say is 100% accurate. But here goes nothing. This task has you, once again, going through a series of 8 different documents. Instead of spotting the difference like in the previous task, this time you have to decide whether a document is worthy of archiving or if it should be deleted. The documents here are a series of excerpts from various articles and internal memos, most of which are talking about the behind-the-scenes happening of Fazbear Inc. As far as I can tell, what you're supposed to do is archive any documents that seem relatively clean and don't mention any of the bad things happening at the company, but anything that explicitly mentions things that could be seen as bad press must be deleted. This has mostly worked for me in my playthrough, so it's probably the intended way you're supposed to go about doing this task. But like I said, this shit is really not explained anywhere at all, which is very annoying and made me actively avoid doing this task for most of the game, which is pretty lame. I get that the screen for this task is pretty cramped already, so there really isn't that much room to fit any sort of explanation, but I don't know, man. That probably should have been prioritized. Maybe I'm wrong about this and there is an explanation somewhere, but if there is, it is not super obvious. With all that aside, the actual task at hand here is pretty good, and is only slightly less enjoyable than Task 1. Overall, I think this is actually a very solid set of tasks for the game, and I think they do an extra good job of fitting into the world of Banshee and feeling like believable busy work. I wish Task 2 was like explained at all, but other than that, I really don't have any complaints about these tasks. They're all simple enough to slot comfortably into the existing gameplay loop without being too overwhelming, but they still add a decent enough extra challenge that actually has benefits. A+ stuff. Okay, I know we've been on night 1 for like a million years at this point, and we're almost done, but there's just one more thing we gotta talk about before we move on. The animatronics. As you already know at this point, Afton is the first animatronic added to the gameplay loop through the salvage section, but Night 1 isn't actually solely dedicated to him. There's actually 2 different animatronics on Night 1, but I've mentioned him enough at this point, let's start with Afton first. Then we'll get into our mystery second animatronic. As I stated earlier, Afton's mechanic is very simple. You don't need to track him on the cameras or anything. No, all you have to do is occasionally check the left side of the room to see if he's there. If he's there when you check the hallway, simply stare him down and he'll go away. That's it. It's that simple. The only way to get jump scared by him is to not check the left hallway for an extended period of time, or to move away from the left side of the room while he's still standing there. This mechanic, while simple, is very effective, and works super well with the rest of the gameplay loop, considering how many seconds Afton makes you waste just looking at him. Sometimes you're just about to finish a task, or you have another animatronic to fend off, but you gotta deal with Afton first, and that can lead to some pretty tense situations. As for his design, I think it's pretty great actually. Very different from what I'm used to with Springtrap and Scraptrap designs, but I think it totally works, especially in the context of the game. Seeing him standing in the pitch black hallway with his crazy ass eyes and crooked smile, it just works, man. I also love how pale Afton's suit looks in this game. I think the muted discoloration really sells the idea that he's been like this for a very long time. If I had to nitpick, I've never been a huge fan of the whole missing arm thing from Scraptrap, and this design does carry that over. I really don't think it enhances the design like at all. It just makes him look slightly less intimidating. Like, oh no, I'm so scared that you're gonna strangle me with the one hand of yours. It's just stupid. Other than that though, solid ass design. I'm a fan. Alright, with Afton covered, let's get into our mystery second animatronic. When playing the game for the first time, it's not going to be super obvious who this second animatronic even is. You never even see them as part of the mechanic. Only when you get jump scared by them do you actually get to see their model. So, who is it then? The second animatronic is none other than Yellow Bear, aka Golden Freddy. Here's how they work. Around the office, there are a bunch of different posters that all seem like decoration at first, but in reality, they're all part of an actual game mechanic you have to keep track of. The posters in the office have a chance to randomly change to It's Me versions that feature amateurish scribble artwork similar to the regular children's drawings. If you notice a poster in the office change design, you have to quickly make sure you're in the main part of the office with the computer turned off in order to deal with it. Once you have that set up, you simply hold down the right mouse button for a little bit to close your eyes, just like in the intro to the game. After a few seconds, any posters that had changed should be back to normal. Leave a poster lingering for too long without closing your eyes, and you get jump scared. I love this mechanic. I think it might be my favorite one in the entire game. Never before have I felt so hyper aware of my surroundings in an office of a FNAF game. There are just so many different posters that can change in the office that you're constantly having to keep an eye out while you do everything else. I think a mechanic like this has a super fine line to walk on to make it feel fair, and Banshee absolutely walks that line. None of the posters are too small or too unnoticeable when they change that it feels unfair. You still do have to put some effort into making sure you notice the changes, but it's not so much that it consumes the entire gameplay loop. On the later nights, when way more shit is going on, this mechanic becomes even more of a threat, since you have to know when it's more beneficial to deal with the other active threats, or it's more beneficial to close your eyes for a little bit to revert any changed posters. Also, I know I mentioned it earlier, but the fact that this mechanic is used during the intro to the game before you even know it's going to be part of the main game is just chef's kiss. Absolutely perfect. I haven't even mentioned yet how the inclusion of Yellow Bear here in the main gameplay loop is a completely new addition only in this game and not in Pizza Sim. And I mean, it's quite literally a perfect addition. Bite Victim's death, out of any of the trauma in Michael's life, is definitely the thing that haunts him the most. So the inclusion just slots in perfectly with the rest of the existing Pizza Sim cast. It also makes perfect sense why Yellow Bear wouldn't have a salvage section or anything like that. They're still a ghost after all, and their game mechanic spells that out pretty clearly. Upon completing the night, a small bit of text saying "You're safe" pops up, signifying that the night is over. But for night 1 specifically, it lingers a little bit in the office. Eventually, it makes you look to your left, where Yellow Bear is standing by the doorway. This comes out of absolutely nowhere, and I think it's a pretty genius inclusion to make sure the player is aware Yellow Bear is in this game, even if they didn't figure that out from playing the first night, which is very plausible. Almost as soon as you see Yellow Bear in the doorway, it quickly cuts to another scrolling text segment, like the one from the intro. This time, however, it's a conversation between the Bite Victim and Michael. Well, I say a conversation, but it's really just Bite Victim tormenting Michael, while he only manages to slip in one single "I'm sorry." The section starts with a view of what is probably the FNAF 4 house, with the Bite Victim asking Michael, "Why did you do that, Mike?" Obviously referring to the bite incident. This is when Michael says, "I'm sorry." But as soon as he does that, the background once again changes to the ocean imagery that's plastered all over Banshee. I find it interesting that the background changes here once the victim specifically calls out Michael for not truly being sorry, but just being scared. Once again, playing into the idea that Michael is scared, alone, and truly has nobody at this point. The vast emptiness, the vast loneliness of the ocean, it's all connected. After this section wraps up, we're thrown into the normal results screen we're going to be seeing after each night. None of this really matters right now, since I'm not going to be talking with the tycoon until a bit later, but it has all the stuff you probably think it has. How many tasks were completed, how good you did during the salvage section, how many lawsuits you got at the tycoon, etc. And with that, we are officially 100% done night 1. For real this time. Upon finishing the first night, a red rectangle will appear on the main menu, which is a little weird, but we'll talk about that later. We're already on a roll here, so we might as well dive right into what's next. Alright, since we've pretty much covered all the groundwork already, how about we go straight into nights 2, 3, and 4 all at once? Normally I wouldn't do anything like this, but none of these nights have any new cutscenes like at the end of night 1, and all the content they feature is really just adding one new animatronic each to the gameplay loop. We pretty much covered every single other thing in the gameplay loop already, so this should be a breeze. Night 5 is a little different and has more going on with it, so it will get its own section near the end of the video. Got it? Hopefully you do. Let's get into it. Starting with night 2, this is the night that introduces Molten Freddy. Well, kinda. You see, Banshee was originally going to have a very standard Molten Freddy design, but somewhere along the way, the design was taken in a completely different direction. And now we have this. Okay, this is by far the scariest design in this entire game. Jesus Christ, man, just look at this fucking thing. Obviously, this design is pretty much just what if Ennard didn't turn into Molten Freddy after Baby left the tangle of wires. And you know what? That's a fun twist on it. I don't hate it. And I don't hate Molten Freddy or anything, but I do think Ennard's design is definitely better. And getting a more fucked up version of said design kinda just works perfectly. It's not like this design completely abandons all aspects of Molten Freddy as well. The chaotic mess of wires that Ennard is very much not is still present on this new design. There's a little bit of a body formation remaining from Ennard, but it's clearly been deteriorating over time, which is a really sick detail. The face, specifically the pupils, really sells this design for me. They genuinely look so crazy. I don't actually know if this animatronic is referred to as a specific name anywhere in the actual game. Maybe it is, but I missed it. However, the wiki simply refers to them as Molten, so we're gonna go with that. As I hinted at previously, Molten is our first introduction to a threat that 100% requires the cameras. Well, okay, maybe 100% isn't actually accurate. I don't know, you'll see. Let's just get into their mechanic. As mentioned previously, Afton is the animatronic in this gameplay loop that is strictly designated to the left hallway. However, this then leaves the right hallway completely empty. The only reason to check it on night 1 was to make sure the poster on that side of the room hadn't changed. But that was it. Well, with the inclusion of Molten to the gameplay loop on night 2, they now take the role of the right doorway character. So now we have a pretty classic FNAF dynamic setup, where each doorway has its own unique animatronic. The hint for this night is they like to play hide and seek, which is absolutely a much better hint than last time. Although, something I didn't mention during the night 1 section is that if you actually die to a specific animatronic, the game will then give you a more in-depth explanation on how to deal with that threat on the game over screen. So if the hints aren't doing it for you, there's always a way to learn more. Anyway, back to Molten. Just like Afton, you essentially just have to be continuously checking the right side of the room to make sure you catch Molten when they show up there. Tracking them on the cameras isn't super useful, and it's 9 out of 10 times more beneficial to be doing tasks or something else rather than obsessing over the cameras. You're forced to check the sides of the room constantly anyway because of the yellow bear mechanic, so it's just the most optimal way to go about this. Anyway, when Molten finally shows up on the right side of your office, they'll immediately retreat into the darkness just like Afton. On the surface, it's the exact same mechanic but for the other door. However, there's actually an aspect of RNG here that has a chance to come into play. If Molten retreats into the darkness of the hallway and nothing happens, you're completely safe and have successfully dealt with Molten. However, if the screen starts to flicker and the background ambience becomes more intense after they leave, that means you're not safe yet. If this happens, happens, you have to quickly go to the computer, access the security camera system, and scroll through all the cameras until you find Molten. Once you've located them on the cameras, you must enter the final command introduced for the terminal for this game, that being play. Similar to the audio lures in Pizza Sim, you're able to place a single audio lure on any of the cameras. So, to fend off Molten in this additional challenge, you must place an audio lure in the room they are in, which will stop the intense ambience and flickering, signifying that you're safe. This same type of mechanic has been used in a few games I've covered already, and I eat that shit up every time. It is one of my favorite uses of a camera system in any FNAF game. The absolute adrenaline rush you get when you're quickly flicking through all the cameras trying to find your target is just brilliant. And the additional sound design that kicks in when it happens here is a top-notch detail. I also love the fact that you never know if you're going to have to do this extra step when you deal with Molten. It really adds a whole other layer of oh shit when the ambience kicks in and the screen starts flickering. That's also why I said earlier that technically this isn't a 100% camera required mechanic, because sometimes you just don't have to use the cameras at all. Hell, you could probably get crazy good RNG in a run and never have to do the second part of the mechanic. I'm sure it's possible, but never happened to me. One of my favorite parts about this mechanic is that you spend a lot of time in the game looking at Molten's sick-ass camera renders. I really haven't talked about the visuals of the cameras in Banshee yet, but I absolutely adore them. I love that they're black and white, and a lot of the characters have really great camera renders. Molten specifically is definitely the standout. They are creepy as shit, and they do a really good job making them feel large and intimidating. Really good shit. Well, that's pretty much it for Molten. Let's roll right into night 3 and the introduction of Lefty. Lefty was really the perfect addition to the gameplay loop post-Molten, because her mechanic is essentially just an extension of theirs if you boil it down. So let's get into it. Lefty is another character that requires the use of the cameras to deal with. On top of that, she also uses the audio lure mechanic you'd already be familiar with at this point thanks to Molten. So it's really just a perfect fit. The hint for Lefty is, by far, the clearest one. The hint is simply, audio calms Lefty down, she won't retreat. Which, like, yep, that is indeed the mechanic. Just like the other animatronics in Banshee, Lefty has a set path through the building that she will take each time you play a night with her in it. However, unlike the other animatronics, she will never return to her previous cameras, and once she makes it to the office, it's GG's. So, the goal here is to stall her for as long as possible so that she can't make it to your office by the end of the night or when you finish all your tasks. Just like the hint suggests, this is done by using the audio lure command on the terminal. Since Lefty starts at the same exact camera at the beginning of every night section, all you have to do is place the audio lure down on that camera as soon as you can, and just keep the camera on her to make sure she doesn't move. I think she has a small chance to move cameras even when the audio lure is on her, but it takes a while, and placing a new one down in her next camera takes like 2 seconds, so it's not a big deal. The ability to keep one camera feed up while you're doing other things on the computer hasn't been super useful up until this point, but Lefty finally makes good use of it, since keeping an eye on her is fairly important. So yeah, that's pretty much the mechanic. But I did mention earlier that it's essentially an extension of the Molten mechanic, so what's that about? As you probably remember, the only way to deal with Molten when you have to play hide and seek with them on the cameras is to play the audio lure on the camera they reside on. This then throws a bit of a wrench into Lefty's mechanic, since when you place down the audio lure for Molten, you're immediately giving Lefty a way higher chance for movement opportunities. So now, every time you have to do the extended version of Molten's mechanic, you also need to quickly find Lefty on the cameras immediately after and place down the audio lure again. It pretty much just adds an entirely new step to Molten's mechanic. But yeah, that's pretty much it. As for Lefty's design, it's pretty good. It's pretty much just a lankier version of the original with some added frills, but it fits into the world of Banshee very well, and I don't think any drastic changes were needed anyway. I do love the sunken eyes she has now though. That is a pretty sick detail. But yeah, with Lefty out of the way, let's head on over to night 4 for the final new gameplay mechanic. For now. Remember those out of order doors I mentioned earlier? Well, on night 4, those doors are finally fixed. I'm surprised anyone even bothered fixing them, considering this whole place is just a death trap anyway, but, you know, shout out to the minimum wage Fazbear Inc. employee who bothered fixing them, I guess. Closing the doors requires the player to grab onto them using the left mouse button and dragging the mouse over to actually close them. I'm always a big fan of little bits of interactivity like this over just hitting a button or something, so I think this was a pretty good gameplay choice. choice. With the doors finally working, you can probably guess that the new animatronic added on this night, Baby, utilizes them. And you'd be right. If you guessed otherwise, I don't know, I'd be very worried. The hint given for Baby is, once again, actually quite helpful. I have no idea why these hints get easier to understand as the game goes on. You'd think it'd be the other way around. Regardless, the hint reads, catch Baby when she leaves and use your doors. While a little vague, it becomes very obvious what the hint means by catch Baby when she leaves pretty early into the night. No more yapping, let's get into the mechanic. Baby starts on the same camera as Lefty, but eventually she works her way around the building until she makes it directly to your office. She doesn't just appear at one of the doors though. No. Instead, she appears in the windows directly in front of you, which was a shock and a half seeing that for the first time. Like, I straight up just expected anything other than that. When Baby reaches the window, she'll stop and look at the player for just a little bit before moving to either the right or the left. Depending on which direction she chooses, you then have to look at the corresponding doorway and pull over the door for just a few seconds. Doing this will successfully scare her off and reset her movement cycle so she can make another attack. Overall, a pretty solid mechanic that puts a nice bow on this gameplay loop. At this point in the game, so many mechanics can be going off at once, but it never feels like it's unfair. I think it's balanced quite well, even if things can feel overwhelming occasionally. That's good though. You don't want things to be too easy or anything. As for Baby's design, yeah, it's fine. It's very much not Scrap Baby and is instead more like a withered baby. Nothing really stands out about it, but the model itself is quite good. And I think it works well in the game itself. It's pretty much just Baby, but a little scarier, and that's totally fine. With that, we are done with Night 4, and almost done with the entire game. There's only one final night remaining. But before we get into that, how about we finally talk about that damn tycoon? I've mentioned the tycoon quite a few times in this video already, and it's actually a pretty ambitious aspect of Banshee. Remember, Freak Show didn't even bother doing a tycoon for stylistic reasons. So this is my first ever experience with a different take on Pizza Sim's tycoon sections. Entering the tycoon isn't as simple as just clicking on a button though. Clicking on the tycoon button will actually send you to another terminal section where you can type in a few different commands. We'll get into the other commands later, but for now, let's finally take a look at the tycoon. Upon booting it up for the first time, you're greeted with this long-ass tutorial video that info dumps everything about the tycoon for you. It's a little boring, but the helpy sock puppet thing is amusing enough, so I'll let it slide. From here, we can finally mess around in the tycoon, and there's actually a lot of options here, especially as you level up and unlock more stuff. You can expand the size of the location to be way bigger than it ever was in Pizza Sim. You can change the floor patterns for different parts of the pizzeria, you can place down carpets, and there's also a whole bunch of tables, props, and animatronics to purchase and use in your restaurant. If you're super creative and wanted to mess around with this for a bit, I genuinely think you could get a lot out of this. Personally, I didn't really mess with it that much. I was way more interested in the core office gameplay, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't still quite impressed with all of this. You can even hire different staff members to help you earn more money and manage the restaurant better. I'm assuming having staff probably also reduces the chance of a lawsuit, which just like in Pizza Sim, is very much a possibility. Whether you end up with a lawsuit or not is determined at the end of the nights, but I kind of already brought that up earlier. Something I also brought up earlier is that you can level up in this tycoon. The more things you have placed down, staff you have, and what animatronics you have performing can all boost your EXP and eventually help you level up all the way to level 5. The higher your level, the more you can purchase from the different shops, so it's definitely worth trying to level up. As cool as this tycoon is, and it's pretty goddamn cool, it's definitely not perfect. For starters, there's no music here, which was definitely one of the most iconic aspects of the Pizza Sim tycoon. This was actually done on purpose, with the reason being the dev normally plays tycoon games with the music muted anyway. But I think the option definitely would have been nice. The other big thing here to note is that there are no longer any mini games directly in the tycoon, as far as I can tell, which is pretty disappointing. This doesn't mean there are no mini games in Banshee, and we'll get to that in a bit, but it does make the tycoon feel a little empty. I do think the sheer amount of creative energy you could hypothetically pour into this does help balance everything out, so at least there's that. When it comes to the visuals of the tycoon, they absolutely nail the early PC game vibe it's going for. I don't even really have much to say about that. I mean, just look at it. Like, yep, that's what a FNAF themed DOS PC game might have looked like. Hell, even that long ass intro movie feels straight out of the era, so even that kind of works. But yeah, That's pretty much the Tycoon. I don't have that much to say about it. Like I said, I really didn't mess around in it that much, but it's still a very cool addition that you definitely cannot ignore when talking about Banshee. That's all for the Tycoon for now, but we aren't done here just yet. Like I mentioned earlier, there are a few minigames here. One's based on the minigames from Pizza Sim no less. To access them, you need to type in specific commands the game gives you in the terminal used to access the Tycoon. Two of these minigames use very simple graphics consisting of various simple drawings in the terminal. Those being the Fruit Punch Clown minigame with the kids running around, and the one where Helpy jumps into a ball pit. Both of these are essentially one-to-one recreations of the minigames found in Pizza Sim, and completing each of them gives you a new item for the Tycoon. These are cute little extras, but nothing really more. You spend a few minutes on them and call it a day. The third and final minigame, Midnight Motorist, is a lot more in-depth than the others, being a mini text-based adventure with actual black and white artwork. It gives you a few of the commands to get around, but purposefully keeps some hidden and just throws you in. I have no idea if this has a proper conclusion or not. I did a few things here and talked to both of the NPCs, but I never felt like I actually finished this and couldn't figure out if there was more. It's a pretty neat addition, but I don't really feel like talking about it too much, considering I genuinely have no idea if there's more or not. I appreciate that any of these were included, but being real here, the minigame offerings definitely pale in comparison to Pizza Sim. This really isn't a massive dig at Banshee though, considering that the main gameplay here is still like significantly better than Pizza Sim's, and that's probably more important. Probably. Goofs aside, all this extra stuff is really awesome, and I'm glad any of it was included at all. This game would still be great without any of it, so the fact that it's here is really just the cherry on top. Okay, we've covered the salvage sections, the Tycoon, and nights 1 through 4. At this point, there's really only one thing left to talk about. It's time to talk about Night 5. Like I mentioned earlier, Night 5 is a little different from the other nights in Banshee, different enough that I really couldn't just lump it in with the other ones. There's kind of a lot to go over here, so let's start with the basics. If you were to play this game straight through without looking for any secrets or messing with the Tycoon, the Night 5 you end up with is actually quite strange. Normally, Night 5s in FNAF games are usually these big final tests of the player to see if they've learned all the mechanics of the gameplay loop over the course of the previous 4 nights. However, this Night 5, while probably being a little harder than Night 4 technically, is actually missing a whole ass animatronic. It doesn't take long to notice this either, because the animatronic missing is actually Lefty, who at this point, you're probably used to immediately placing the audio lure on at the start of the night. So her absence immediately makes Night 5 feel off. Completing this strange Night 5 actually gives you an ending, but it's a very unsatisfying one where Henry refuses to let go of his deceased daughter and his past, even apologizing to Michael for wasting his time. Something kind of interesting about this ending is that the ocean imagery returns for the start of this ending, but is slowly phased out and replaced with footage of the new Fazbear location Michael's been working at all week burning to the ground. Almost like Henry was going to accept his fate and go through with finally embracing his issues head on, but walked out of it at the last second. The way this ending is written, it also implies that Henry meant for Michael to not be in the building while it burned, but he didn't get the memo on time and went in for his last shift anyway. This is pretty much just a weird twist on the already existing ending of Pizza Sim. It feels very anticlimactic though, almost like it's a bad ending or something. Anyway, as I've been implying, there is a better ending you can get in Banshee. One that finally puts an end to everything once and for all, just like the ending of Pizza Sim. How you get that ending is by finding a series of secret areas in the game and following the path laid out for you. It all starts with that red rectangle that appears after Night 1, and you kind of just follow the path from there. I don't want to spoil any of this for you because it's actually really cool, and I think it's probably one of the best set of secrets like this I've seen in any FNAF fan game. It doesn't waste your time with puzzles that take 15 million people to figure out. It's fairly straightforward and pretty reasonable for a single person to kind of just casually solve during their playthrough, and I respect it a lot for that. So if you ever play this game, definitely try and complete this secret path. It's totally doable without a guide or anything. I did the entire secret path by myself on my first playthrough, but unfortunately, the final step with the puzzle requires having enough money to buy the safe in the Tycoon, which also requires a max level pizzeria. I did not meet these requirements, but thankfully, you can still do a couple things if you want to experience the real ending. For starters, starting a new save file does not reset your Tycoon, so you can play the game again to grind the remainder of the money and reach the max level. Or Now hear me out, or you can just edit the text save file like I did. That also works too. Hey, I cheated, I'm sorry. I think I definitely could have done it the legit way pretty easily, but I was already in a bit of a time crunch for this video, so forgive the cheating. Anyway, upon purchasing the safe and entering your save file specific code, you are finally given access to the true Night 5. This is done by accessing another text-based cutscene that explains the story of Charlotte Emily, so you can probably guess where this is going. One thing I want to point out real quick about this text cutscene, before we get into the night proper, is that I think this is the first time in the game the ocean is actually implied rather than directly shown. This is because of the new angle we see in this cutscene, revealing that Michael is on some sort of boat. I'm sure there are a couple ways to interpret this, but I interpreted it as basically being a way to show that Michael's journey on this metaphorical ocean is coming to an end. Before this, all we ever saw was the vast empty ocean, which doesn't really imply any sort of goal or destination. After this whole secret side quest though, now we finally get to see the boat, implying that Michael has a destination in mind most likely. There's a specific direction that Michael is going in. I don't think the destination is land or anything though. I think it's more about accepting fate and knowing what to do before doing that. Speaking of knowing what to do before finally accepting fate, let's just jump into the real Night 5 already. As I already made painfully obvious, the true Night 5 is basically a puppet boss fight. Although it's less of a boss fight and more like, here's a new animatronic that has two different mechanics and Lefty is also still gone because Lefty is the puppet, duh. Yellow Bear, Afton, Molten, and Baby are all still active and need to be dealt with alongside the puppet. Because of this, the puppet doesn't add that much to the gameplay loop compared to some other final boss type animatronics in FNAF fan games, but I still think it works quite well regardless. So let's get into it. The puppet has both a camera mechanic and an office mechanic, so you have to be looking out for them pretty much at all times. In my experience, I found that she likes to spam her camera mechanic way more than her office mechanic, which makes sense considering that the camera mechanic is definitely more time consuming. Neither of these mechanics are that complex though. Starting in the office, the puppet will occasionally make a small noise that comes from either the left or right hallway. You have to turn to the correct side of the room and quickly shut the door on the puppet, making her retreat into the darkness. The camera mechanic is pretty much just Molten's, but without all the extra stuff. Every so often, the puppet will laugh. This is your signal to check all the cameras in order to find out where the puppet is hiding. Upon finding her, looking at her for a few seconds will make her retreat and you'll be safe. And yeah, that's pretty much it. It sounds simple, but there is a bit of a learning curve to it all, since you know nothing going into the night. The hint is literally just good luck. Lefty was like, barely a threat to the overall gameplay loop outside of making dealing with Molten take a little bit longer, so replacing her with her but not a bear and with better mechanics is the perfect way to close out the gameplay. Design-wise, this puppet design is pretty good. I like how frilly it is, similar to Lefty, and the face mask is pretty unsettling. Something about that nose, man, I don't know. I don't trust it. With Night 5 complete, there's only one more thing to talk about: the true ending. After the events of Night 5, the office goes completely dark, with everyone still in the building. Michael knows what he has to do. He pulls out a lighter and lights it. Like how the moon was the only light source at the very beginning of the game, over the rough ocean waves, this lighter is all he has in the darkness of the office. After Michael flicks the lighter a few times, Yellow Bear, his brother, appears in front of him, finally opening his eyes for the first time in the game, looking directly at Michael. Eventually, Yellow Bear goes away, but after his departure, yellow text quickly appears on screen. Suffocating darkness surrounds. You're alone. This is what you wanted. This is what had to be done. Then why does it still hurt? The background music slowly fades out. For a moment, it's quiet. This moment of silence isn't long, however, as almost as soon as it started, it's interrupted by a very familiar sight and sound. Running water, clashing waves, the ocean. It's not really there, but at this point it's hard to tell what's reality and what's not. All this is to say, there's no more running from it. The barrier between life and death. The final destination on the boat. Michael can't escape the ocean any longer. He has to do it. One final time. With the lighter still blazing, he closes his eyes. It takes a bit, but eventually, the sounds of the ocean fade away. For real this time. Silence. Michael doesn't try to open his eyes. He accepts fate. He accepts his freedom. It's finally over. Now, everyone is free. And that, my friends, is Banshee. There's a custom night mode you can unlock after completing the story, which is pretty cool, but as far as I can tell, there's no extras menu, which is pretty sad. Maybe I missed something, I'm not sure. Regardless, I think I'm gonna end things here anyway. Feels like a nice place to stop. Thank you all so much for watching, we should be back to normal next video, and I'll see you all next time. Bye everyone.
So up number 10 is if you look into the marionette's eye when he attacks you, you will see that there is something peeking out from inside his right socket. It looks like some kind of a sort of a mysterious purple smudge